My name is Don Taylor, and I want to welcome everybody to the middle grades conversation. Today, we're going to continue talking about equity, social justice, and anti-racist education, and what folks are doing in their practices to either learn about that or to implement changes in the way they're teaching. And essentially, this is going to be a roundtable discussion where we gather and hear from one another and hear how folks are doing. Just one word that this is recorded and it will be posted on our Middle Grades Conversations, Middle Grades Collaborative YouTube channel. And also, we're going to kind of see how it's going to work in terms of format. I think we'll end up having a roundtable discussion, but I just want to put in the chat, I've started with a little introduction order, and people can just kind of fill in after that. And before we start, this work is sponsored by the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Education, and we often partner with Up for Learning. And thanks everybody for being here. I know we're all looking forward to the Thanksgiving break, but it's good to get together and hear from one another. So Monica, do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll update the order of introductions in the chat. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, Don. Hi, great to see many of you. I'm Monica Mcinerney. I'm an associate professor of education at Castleton University. And I have invited today several students who are in my Equity and Learning for Pre-Service Educators course. It's just a few of us. This is the first time I've taught the course, and we've been learning together, really digging into, of course, Gorski's framework and all kinds of things regarding equity and anti-racist education. So we're so happy to be here today. And Don, thank you so much for the email alerting us that this was happening today. We usually meet from 2 to 3:15, and so we're meeting a little bit later today. But I'm very happy to have some of my students here, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Andreas?
Yeah. So like my professor said, I'm a professor, or I'm a student of the Ed Equity class. It was kind of offered to me as an elective, and I kind of just had a general interest because I'm taking a couple of civil rights class in tangent. So I kind of was just interested in where this goes. I am a history major in tangent with pursuing my licensure for middle level. So
awesome. Welcome. Jamie?
Hi, my name is Jamie. I'm also an MDS major. I'm not pursuing licensure right now, but I am applying for some grad school opportunities in the fall, as well as a teaching job in Spain. My main focus is bilingual education and bicultural education, so I'm looking forward to learning today.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Kevin Peely Hunt. I am a 5/8 journalist on Swift House at Williston Central School, and welcome to all of our guests today. It's good to see you all.
Hi there, I am Meg O'Donnell. I teach humanities to 7th and 8th graders at Shelburne Community School. Good to see you all.
Maura?
Hi, everyone. I'm Maura Wheeler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning and Technology Integration Coach at Lamoille South Unified Union. It's so nice to see everyone and to have some pre-service teachers with us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, ditto that. It's great to see some new faces. I'm Sarah Popowicz. I am a program director for Up for Learning. And before that, I was a classroom teacher, science teacher in middle level for about 20 years.
All right, Heidi?
Hi, I'm Heidi Waddell. I am a Castleton student in Monica's equity class. I'm an MDS major and hoping to get my licensure in K through 6 teaching certificate.
All right, thank you. And I think we have one more guest. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm also a Castleton student. I'm an MDS major with a concentration in history and special ed endorsement.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It is good to have some new faces and hear from some new perspectives. One of the things I think we're going to move to the roundtable discussion prompts, and the first prompt that we talked about was last month. A contributor spoke of the idea that social justice should not just be an add-on or something extra, but fully integrated into our curriculum. And are there any classroom teachers or education experts on the panel who could sort of give an example of how they're integrating social justice into the curriculum fully, and maybe just provide some successes and challenges of what that looks like in your classroom or within your program? And I'm just going to let people raise their hand and kind of address that if they can. If there's anybody who wants to start us off, take it away. I can call on people too. Kevin, why don't you start us off?
You thought I haven't been on Zoom. I was like looking for the hand raise button and it was gone. So here I am. Thank you, Don. A couple of things we do on Swift House. First, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago now, we spent a week at MGI and decided as a team that sustainability was going to be just part of our curriculum instead of an extra unit that we do. So that's something that, the UN SDGs, which obviously have that environmental side to them, as well as the social side to equity. It's something that we've ingrained just into our regular curriculum. So it's one of our core classes that our students take. Typically just kind of the short summary of how it goes. We spend most of the fall unpacking the global goals and getting into some of the community issues and ideas. And then our students brainstorm some project ideas. And like today, we actually just had our big survey where kids picked, out of 20 potential like action projects and groups, they chose their top 4, and then we're going to sort them into these small groups that they'll be working with throughout the remainder of the year, developing community partners and really thinking about what's some action research that they can get into by June. And we're taking some things from like Sarah and Lindsay from Up for Learning with the YPAR model, and probably going to be reaching out to you too, Sarah, about community partners and connections. But it's just a great opportunity for them to dive into some of those social issues and things that are meaningful for them. So that's one way that we're addressing this. It's just part of our curriculum. Another thing that we do more so in humanities, it definitely comes up in our other core classes, but we always have to adjust our learning scales and learning targets, but what we're grateful for is we're very flexible with the content that we use. So throughout the entire fall, like we are just social justice, like everything that we do comes back to a social justice themed unit. And we're connecting past to present. We're using a lot of just current events, working with our students, thinking about what injustices are they seeing and how can we uplift, how can we be activists. So we do a lot of work on studying different activists and activism in general and what they can do as middle schoolers to become activists. So we've had a lot of success with that, just because, again, like especially at this age, 5th through 8th grade, on our team anyway, we're 5th through 8th grade, these kids are really ready to have these conversations and talk about these bigger issues in our world and things that they're seeing too, and changes they want to make around their own local communities. So whenever we're doing any of our work, it really is grounded in social justice, and we typically lean on those learning for justice, the old teaching tolerance standards. Looking at having those as like our anchor that we come back to, and it's Don, things that we've taken from you. It's just constantly getting feedback from kids too, and just saying like, hey, what matters to you right now? What are some things that you want to explore? That's really been helpful. In terms of challenges, it's keeping everything together sometimes at the middle school level, and making sure that we are offering enough voice and choice in the matter, and just finding that appropriate balance, especially with like the 5th and 6th graders and what we're asking them to do compared to the 7th and 8th graders.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Does anybody else want to talk about how they're incorporating these ideas into the classroom? Meg?
Sure. Happy to, Don. Thanks. So I'm on a 4-person team and of 7th and 8th graders, and 2 of us teach humanities. And so Wendy and I she's my teammate who also teaches humanities. And our approach is really we're both integrated at the same time. So we're either embedding literacy into whether we're heavy literacy focused or heavy more like social study, I guess, focused. But really it's pulled together at the same time. And we operate under an overarching question for our year, and then try to break it down into semester. So overarching question for this year is, how does place, identity, and society shape our understanding and our purpose in the world? And so each trimester we pull down a focus for that. And so this trimester, she's reading The Outsiders and doing some work on society and the tensions that exist in socioeconomic situations. And I'm focused on the social identities. And students right now have identified, like, I've done a lot of work identifying the different social identities. And right now they have created, for lack of speeches where they're advocating for change in how we address stereotypes and bias in our communities. And so we've used a ton of resources from Facing History. And then one of the things I was thinking about, the struggle, I think always when we're doing any work, is how do you bring closure to something without losing that thread, right? Like I don't want to end this work on social identities. We're going to pull this through into our next work, which will be around conflict and looking at historic conflicts, but always keeping that thread of whose voices were telling the stories, whose voices are absent from those histories. What are the misconceptions that are out there, whose voices have been silenced? And so doing identity work is so exciting. It's so fitting for middle level kids. They just love it. They love trying to understand themselves and their place in the world, and then knowing how those identities interplay. I think one of the conceptions that we had at the beginning was that everything had a separate column, and really it's all very, our identities are muddy and they're fluid and they change depending on the circumstances. And that was, I think, a pretty significant aha for them. So the challenges are always time and just keep maintaining student engagement and enthusiasm was something. 2 days before break, and then picking up those meaningful threads when we continue with the work. So I'll let you know how it goes when we come back.
All right, thank you so much, Meg. Maura, I see you have your hand raised.
So many months of Zoom, right? So I can't find the unmute. I was just going to say, I work with 2 middle schools, and they have sort of like taken on different ways of really centering social justice in their work. At one of our middle schools, we have teams who've been really focused on all teachers of the team teach a section of the language arts class. And so they're really focused on transforming their language arts class to be really centered around social justice. And so looking at the texts that they're using, sort of the essential questions of the work around language arts, because that's sort of where they can collaborate the most as a team and ensure sort of like all students have that experience. And a group of those teachers also are leading professional development for teachers sort of like across the district. Some of that work started last year, which is really quite exciting. And then we also have other teams who have a different configuration to teach out of a humanities model, similar to what Meg was explaining, and they and those teams of teachers they're 4-person teams, and they're really thinking about how they integrate it across all 4 teachers in the content areas. And so it's sort of different by the configuration of the teams, but I would say some real strengths is that when it's centered and when it's really like the central part of the curriculum, it's so much more meaningful and engaging for the students. They're really looking for us to have these conversations and really looking for us to hold space for students to critically engage and sort of like grapple with what's happening in their world, and to really look at history with a critical lens. And so we found that it's been a really powerful opportunity, and also thinking about even in sort of some more like non-academic settings, the advisory program at one of our middle schools has really centered social justice in their work and in their advisory practices. And so I think sometimes when we think about centering social justice, we tend to think about like what's happening in our social studies or global citizenship class, or what, you know, what books are being read, or what does the display look like in the library. But there are a lot of other areas in the school, such as like advisory programs, that really can be anchored in social justice and be really transformative. And so I think in that way, that's exciting and powerful work, and really helps to push schools forward.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks. So just for like some quick background, Up for Learning, the work that we do consulting with youth and adult teams from across Vermont and now outside of Vermont, and even some global teams, is always rooted in the idea of youth adult partnerships, and really having youth and adults at the table together to make decisions, to address what's happening, to talk about and reimagine education for all in the classroom and throughout schools and throughout the communities. And so really everything everyone has said are components that we work on. You know, whether there's a sustainability focus or a restorative practices focus or a social justice focus, in the end, every single one of those pieces is really rooted in relationships and building community and having every single individual feel heard and noticed and recognized for who they are. Especially like Meg talking about the identity piece, right? And so if we're doing that and we are in a place of shared power and responsibility, shared voice, respect, if all of those things are sort of rooted together, and then we are also helping teach like dialogue, how to have conversations, how to talk to each other respectfully, how to listen, how to have empathy. As you're doing all of those pieces, in the end, like that is a social justice curriculum, right? Like all of those pieces are what builds social justice curriculum. And it really just comes down to those basics of teaching how to be in relationship with your fellow human beings in your classroom and in your community, and in the world, and make sure that everybody, you know, everyone's being treated with equality and respect, and that youth have power in defining when that's not happening, saying when that's not happening, and then problem solving together what to do next, right? Like, okay, if this is not happening in our classroom, what are we going to do about it? And when youth and adults are doing that together with shared responsibility and shared power, is sort of like ups the level of integrity in what you're trying to work on. And so I feel like that has overwhelmingly been the focus of all of our work, no matter what the actual like name of the project is. That has been the ground level rooting of everything we've been doing within the last 2 years. And quite frankly, I don't see it changing. Like I only see it growing stronger.
Thanks, Sarah. I definitely have some thoughts related to that. However, I think Monica wants to contribute? Monica.
Thank you. First of all, this is really exciting for me to see several of my students here listening to all of you. And just FYI, Sarah, Lindsay actually zoomed into this equity course.
Oh, this is she told me about that. Great.
It's less about Up for Learning. Yeah.
Perfect.
So it's great to meet you, because I don't think we've met. I don't know if we have, but anyway, great to see you. And I just wanted to let you know, at the pre-service teacher level, it's very exciting, because every time a new, upcoming teacher creates a lesson plan now, they are including the equity competencies. So that's been kind of a big change as far as my practice goes anyway, and making sure that they're explicitly thinking about how to create learning environments that are inclusive of all students. They're explicitly thinking about their implicit biases and, how they can be more inclusive. Culturally responsive pedagogy. We've talked a lot about the equity audits, in our classrooms, and how we want to make sure that we have multiple voices. And then, of course, historically marginalized populations, and just creating more personalized approaches. So this is something that has not, in my view, at least maybe from my own perspective, really been explicitly added to all of our lessons in the past. So it's been really exciting the last several years, adding in and knowing that the latest group of new teachers coming out there are going to be including this kind of work in their lessons.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you, everybody, also for your ideas. I want to tag back onto what Sarah was talking about in terms of the dialogue, because I'm working with Sarah in my own classroom. And I've started a new program this year on sustainability. And I think I mentioned this last month, that it took me a while to realize that sustainability isn't just about the environment or climate or the actions, but it's also about creating sustainable communities that are anti-racist, that are just, and that are based in this social justice and equity work. And as many of us may have been experiencing in the third year of the pandemic, I think that everybody is at a heightened level. I can't put my finger on it, but maybe a heightened level of sort of angst, anxiety, aggravation. And we're seeing this in student behaviors. And working to create those socially just communities, as Sarah mentioned, with shared power, is so important. But I think it's very challenging too. And it's, how do we create those dialogues? So I just completed my first trimester with 7th and 8th graders, and I've done a feedback, and they've said that they want to have these discussions. And the discussions need to be about the important things that they're seeing in the news, they're seeing on social media, because if we're not doing that, then they think that we're ignoring it's irrelevant to them. And the challenge I have is, as Sarah mentioned, how do you teach kids to have dialogue and to have empathy and to be good listeners? Those are really, really high level skills. And for a lot of for myself, I'll speak for myself, just having kids talking all the time, sometimes it doesn't feel like you're getting anything. There's that old model of we have to be producing, but the talking is what's so important. And figuring out how to talk and how to have these dialogues is a challenge that I'm working with Sarah on. Like, how do you structure it? What's the protocol? How do you get it so that kids are leading the conversations? And more importantly, how do you get it so that kids are choosing what they want to talk about, and so that they can address what's happening? And then beyond that, that's one challenge that I'm working on, chopping wood on that one. But the other one is, once you have those dialogues and kids are telling you what they want to happen, how do you then take action? Like, how are we empowering the kids to take action in partnership, so that we're not I feel like right now, a lot of adults who are working in schools are knocking heads with students around behaviors, right? And I think what Sarah's talking about is, how do we sit down and have those dialogues so that we can create a community that is socially just and equitable, that people feel good about. And Maura mentioned in our last conversation about, are we creating places of healing? Are we creating places of harm? And if we're going to create schools that are healing kids and loving kids, how do we get to that place of shared power through dialogue? And I think really that's the challenge that I'm I'm working on right now and implementing that and turning that over to the kids. And so that's something I'm thinking about, just kind of tagging on to other folks. I'd like to welcome Joe and also Amanda. And Joe, do you want to address this prompt? And then I'm going to sort of open it up for any questions from folks around what we've just discussed. Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Rivers from Brattleboro Area Middle School. And I guess I would say that, can you say again, Don, you were saying something about something through dialogue? What was it?
Well, creating shared power through dialogue, but also creating communities that are learning communities that are socially just, empathetic, and that are supporting and supportive and inclusive of all the people who are in those learning communities.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how to do that. The closest I can get to something like that is those sorts of things, but through projects. Because for me, we've got to be doing something. If we're sitting and talking, then people all have their opinions, and then some are researched in one way and some are researched in another. And I struggle with that a bit. And so for me, it's been about finding community-based projects to try to work together on, and then try to facilitate those things you were mentioning, the idea of making sure that everyone's included, that stories of the past are not discarded, but they're embraced, and different versions of stories from the past are also chased, and that we're trying to do things in the present to rectify some things in the past that may not have been properly done. I can work within that context. I think I feel pretty good about that, but it's hard for me to sit in a circle and talk. And so I'd be interested in hearing how that plays out. I've done the Socratic method with folks, and that sort of thing is based on students having done some research and having some things to fall back on besides their own opinions, but also being able to pull in information from other sources. And that's not quite the same, I don't think, as the dialogue that you're talking about. So I'm interested in how that plays out.
I'm interested too, Joe. And I will certainly let you know, but again, that's a challenge that I have in creating that instruction. Are there folks who have questions about anything they've heard or how this is implemented, or any comments? Are we good to move on to the next prompt? Okay. Oh, hold on a second. Yep. Thanks, Sarah. If I don't see you, have a great Thanksgiving. Okay. So one of the questions I think that we should be maybe talking about or addressing, I mentioned it briefly, is the fact that we're in the third year of the pandemic, and we're talking about dialogue, and we're talking about social justice. We're talking about things that are really difficult because that's what kids are seeing. That's what we're seeing sort of in the headlines. And those kids are coming. I don't know what all the kids are experiencing outside of school. Most of us can't know, what kids are bringing into the classroom. But how are teachers using sort of trauma-informed instruction and social emotional learning pieces in their classrooms now, so that you can have these productive, positive learning communities? And what are you doing as an educator to support all students in your classroom to get through what is, I think, is probably the toughest thing that we've ever taught through? And so I'd just be very interested to hear how some of our practitioners are addressing those challenges as well. Go ahead, Meg.
Thanks, Anna. I was just actually going to look for, Kev has mentioned a title of a book that he read this summer that I keep meaning to go get after these meetings, and then I forget. So I need to get that book. So I was hoping that Kevin would go first and talk about the book. But some of the things, just there certainly have been some. I am really trying to be calm and to take mindful moments as often as I can, and really modeling for kids, especially when I'm feeling my own. We have this ridiculous pace in our day that feels the antithesis to what we learned from the pandemic. So it's frustrating, but it's the reality of what we have. And so I'm trying to just take a few breathing breaths with kids is at the start of the morning, like the start of the day, sometimes in the middle of class. We spend a lot of time outside whenever we can for snack breaks. We go on a team walk every morning. And even when it's raining, we're just like bundle up and we kind of make everybody go. And it's actually really a lovely way to start the day, even when it's a little muddy and raining. And so those are just some of the things. We have a circle once a week, which I'm new at the circle. I haven't had a ton of training around it, but that isn't stopping us from doing it. And we try to host a team meeting, and we host a team meeting once a week. And I think all of those things are helping us to remind kids that we're part of a team and part of a community, and more needs to, we still need to do more. We continue to, I think the thing that I just want to say is, even when it's hard, we still do it. And that's the part that I feel good about, is that, because it would be really easy to just say, this is too hard for kids, they're disruptive, or they don't listen to the instructions. And it's like, right, we just need to keep practicing it with this. We still need to keep, having them come together and try to push past the, when it gets challenging or hard.
Thank you so much, Meg. Kevin?
Yeah, so I mean, since Meg brought that up, I put it in the chat. This book I read over the summer really, I think, changed the way I thought about a lot of things I do in my practice. It's called Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education by Alex Bennett. She's been I actually just watched a webinar with her recently. Just a lot with obviously trauma-informed and equity-centered practices. And, it's little things that I feel like we have been considering, like even at the start of the school year, like the prompts that you're giving kids, like, hey, how was your summer? Like for kids who undergo trauma, like that could really re-traumatize them in the school year. And it's, she makes the point of, we can't ever assume that the trauma stops when they enter school, and school is a trauma-free space. We have to assume and know that trauma happens in school as well. And hopefully with that lens, it's changing the way that we're, both working with our students and thinking about our curriculum. Another big piece she brings up is just this idea of dehumanizing students based on control. I think that's what we're seeing a lot now with some of the behaviors, because, if you're thinking about behavior as communication, these kids are traumatized through this pandemic. I mean, I can't imagine being a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old having to wear a mask every day and having these different protocols you have to follow. And, a lot of, behavior is communication. This is how they're communicating that with us. And we started looking at it through that lens and bringing the human aspect back to reality. It makes it easier to have a conversation with them. And instead of saying, hey, you need to learn how to cope with A, B, and C, it's looking at systems and things that are there and saying, wow, yeah, this is hard, and accepting that it is hard. And instead of, I feel like we do too much with, you have to learn how to cope with what is hard in your life, and not enough with just addressing the fact that things are hard and hitting it more at the systems level, and having the kids hear you say that, I think that just changes the conversation and changes the control aspect too, instead of butting heads with a kid, being like, why aren't you sitting in your seat? Or why are you talking when you're not supposed to be talking? It definitely changes the perspective there. And that way too, like she gets into a piece about how SEL can be weaponized because of that. So really thinking about, if we're truly thinking about social emotional learning, who is it for? How are we delivering that instruction? Is it all just about how they're coping to deal with stuff? Or are we really thinking about their well-being and you know, getting into some of those, like the 5 CASEL standards and whatnot. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, really trying to bring kids and families more into the conversation about decisions we're making. I think, you know, kids are ready to have these conversations at the middle level, especially, you know, at the 504 IEP EST levels. You know, we're sitting at a table making all these decisions for these kids. Like, how often do you actually go and ask the kid, what do you need from us? And if you're like, yeah, we just had a conversation with all the kids' teachers and their connections, but I didn't actually sit down with the kid or the family and say, hey, what do you need from us to be successful or enjoy school more? It's like all of a sudden that switch starts to change, and which is going to help foster those relationships. And then you see the snowball effect of, you know, the social justice in the curriculum, like everything builds from that. So it really was, I would encourage, if you haven't read the book yet, it really opened my eyes and just made me reflect on the way I was approaching my practices and teaching. And it was a good little shock to the system, you know, that I needed for sure.
Thank you, Kevin. There's a lot to unwrap there. I also, before I forget, I also just want to make sure that everybody knows that Alex Vanette is going to be the speaker at the middle grades conference. She's the keynote speaker. So that'll be a great time to hear more about what she's doing and her approach. Other folks want to contribute?
I'll go. So I was listening, it was good. I am happy to be here and to listen to these wise people. It's a highlight of the month, so thank you. As I was listening to what was being said, some things we're trying to do is we're trying to take control of our schedule. You know, Meg was talking about how the schedule is crazy. And so when we get back from this Thanksgiving break until the next break, the next 3 weeks, we've just chucked the schedule and we've talked with the students about what they need. And we're going to do 3 weeks of, let's try to figure this out together. We're not just putting in time here. You know, we have goals. Our goals as adults is to try to support you and give you opportunities to build skills, to be successful as you move forward. How are we going to do this? Let's start trying to figure it out. So we're having those conversations with students, and we are fortunate enough to have blocks of time where we can change what we're doing, and so we're going to do that. And then we're going to process it after 3 weeks and talk with the students again and see what might need to be different. So one of the things that frustrates me is what I hear from students in different ways is that we have overpromised as adults, as a culture, as a society. We have overpromised again and again and again. And they look at us and we say stuff and they shake their heads and say, BS, you know, that's not, what you're saying is not what's happening. There's a disconnect between the messages our systems present to students and what their experiences are. And I think that's where a lot of the conflict's coming. And so that all goes back to relationships again and trying to figure things out together, not present ourselves as we know what's going on, you do what we say and everything's great. That can't be what we're doing. There's like a continuum. There's compliance on one end and there's curiosity on the other. And we just seem to be, as systems, we're stuck in that compliance end of things. And we're not providing opportunities for students to practice curiosity. You know, a goal of mine on a daily basis is to get somebody to laugh hard enough that they have trouble keeping their mask on. You know, it doesn't, just what's going on, what's happening, in, in our conversations and in what we're doing, so that that's an outcome. There's got to be more of that instead of less. And so the other thing that really stresses me right now, because of these last couple of years, is the information that's coming out with adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, and the fact that we're all there as adults and as children. If we look at those lists and how those things have an impact on our lives, none of us have been in this position before. And I think if we all work from that given, then we can build things together. I've stressed before that concept of emergent learning, having things emerge from the experiences we're having in order to build new experiences that incorporate the skills and the practices that we want students to have. If we enter into teaching with preconceived notions about what's supposed to be the outcome, that's why we're button heads as much as we are. Those are my biases. And these experiences that we're having during these couple years haven't really changed those biases much. And I think these things are exasperating the problems. All right, so change the schedule, change your outlook, listen to them, have conversations with them, create goals together, move forward. Don't put in, if you give them the message that we're just putting in time, that's what's a big problem. That there are adults working with students right now that are so frustrated and having such a hard time themselves that they are not doing much except putting in their time, because that's all they can do. But if that's the message that we're giving the kids, then we're not going to get much back from the students except they're putting in time too. And we're not going anywhere then.
Thanks, Joe. Monica?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, say with my students who are here, not all of them are middle level educators. Some folks are going secondary and some elementary, but what Joe just said, it reminds us of what we've known for a long time in middle level philosophy, which is it's all about the student needs first, the developmental needs. The content is secondary. And I think with the pandemic, that's hit home to the top. And I also just want to say thank you so much to each of you practitioners who are with the kids all day and seeing and recognizing these challenges with COVID. And we have to keep talking about it, that this is primary. What they need right now may not be what they needed, what students needed a few years ago. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Monica. Joe, one of the things when we talk about the SEL stuff, one of the things we take a break every day. We also, like Meg, we go walking quite a bit, and we do a lot of community walks. And one of the challenges, I challenge the kid, hey, can we get up to the Hubbard Park Frog Pond safely? It's amazing how much practice kids need walking, right? Like just to walk in a straight line down the sidewalk. So we practice walking a lot, but it's really, I call it a great opportunity to rub shoulders, just to kind of jostle and have a low key way of talking. And it's a great way of getting to know your students. When you have the opportunity to have these one-on-one conversations, maybe at the front of the line or at the back of the line. The other thing that we've done too is I moved into a new room this year that has some kitchen area, and there's a kettle in there. And so we're having tea and hot chocolate on kind of a regular basis. And it's amazing how tea and hot chocolate actually soothe and calm people. Ooh, can I get some hot chocolate? Yeah, there's some for everybody, but you have to do your dishes. And the kids are like, oh, I can do that. And just kind of allowing kids to sit around and have conversations and enjoy and being kind to each other just through a cup of tea or a cup of hot chocolate has been really good. The behaviors have been challenging though. And, recently I had an incident with a kid where I wasn't my best self. And how do you repair that harm? And how do you, when a kid, or you are, you're butting heads and there's kind of that that moment, how do you go back and repair that? And what, the kids are telling me, it's a lot about communication. It's a lot about consistency. It's about the language that we're using. It's also about the language that kids are using with each other. That's one of the biggest things that I'm seeing right now is the language that people are accepting to have around them. And that it's something that we just got to start talking about and be talking about it all the time, because the language, and I think that has been exacerbated by the pandemic, what people are willing to say and willing to tolerate. And so the language we use, I think, says a lot about the culture we're creating in our educational communities. And so that's also a focus. So for me, it's about creating a lot of outdoor time, a lot of time with unstructured socialization, where we still have expectations, but kids can be talking to you or talking to each other without being sort of it being schoolified. Creating moments like with the hot chocolate and tea, where we can just come together as a community, and then figuring out when there is an incident or when you do get into it with a student, how do we repair that harm in a way that leaves everybody feeling better about the situation? And I think that requires teachers and myself to be vulnerable and to say, hey, you know what, I was wrong on that, and I apologize, and I'm really sorry. And I think that when you start doing that, I think that the kids aren't, as Joe mentioned, they're not just looking at you and saying, oh, this is BS. They're instead saying, okay, I get it. We were, and that's happened, with the kids too. And I also, somebody said something interesting today. We were watching a video about the UN SDGs, and I said, what did you notice about this? And they said, well, everybody's working in groups. And I think getting the group work back into our schools and into our classrooms is really important. I think kids are really missing that. And just, that would be sort of one level up in terms of the socialization. There's a little bit more structure. There's an outcome, hopefully, that the kids have voice and choice in, but providing those opportunities for kids, I think, is really important. And we've had some group projects recently where kids have been very grateful for that. And so I think that's also something that we're kind of weaving into what we're doing on a daily basis. Maura, did you have some thoughts on this?
It's been so nice to just listen to this group. So I don't work directly with students, but what I can tell you is that I think, like most classrooms, we have teachers who are really, and students who are really struggling right now. And so we've been at sort of the district and system level really trying to get curious, sort of as Kevin was saying, and really reframing of like, so what is the behavior communicating? What are students telling us? And then also really thinking about, we think a lot about co-regulation. So how do we ensure that our adults have what they need and they're regulated so that they can help co-regulate with students? Because I think that's a really important element to this too, that just as our students are being impacted by year through the pandemic, our teachers and their families and their extended families, right, are also greatly impacted by what's going on. And so really thinking about that and not really having any answers. And it's so hard. And I think a lot of times it feels like we're not getting anywhere, or, we can't get to the solution. We can't name it, which is really, really hard. But I think coming back to, what are we doing to ensure that people are getting what they need sort of at all levels? And one of the highlights of my day where I see sort of the most joy, one of the high schools that's on our campus has front steps, and that's where students can step out and take their mask breaks with their teachers. And just seeing people outside with their masks off and smiling and sort of like having that like exhale moment, like it's so visible, and really thinking about like what would it look like to have more centers in our schools that look like that, and how do we keep that, right? Like we have mask breaks right now because we have this sort of like physical reminder and people need a break, but when we sort of transition, how do we keep these sort of breaks going and making sure that we're getting into outdoor spaces and we're feeling sunshine and doing those things, because it really does make a difference. And I think right now we have the autonomy in classrooms to say like, okay, let's take a break or let's go step outside. And I think we haven't always felt that way. And so really thinking about how do we keep that going.
Thank you, Maura. That's, again, some great points about that. We're going to, Monica, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to ask for some questions. And then the last piece, we're sort of getting down to it here, but the last piece, I just want to ask folks, our practitioners, how you're staying connected. And as as Maura mentioned, what are some of the things that you're doing to support yourself or to get you through this? What are those things? But first, Monica, do you have any questions for us, or do your students have any questions for us?
Yeah, I just want to say it's so incredible to hear these experts, all these experts, but I also want to recognize we have these brand new, not even a teacher yet, folk here who have been thinking about equity, thinking about the pandemic. You know, some have families of their own who are in schools, and I just wanted to make sure they had some voice today. If there's anything that any of you all want to say, Andreas, Michaela, Amanda, Jamie, or Heidi.
Andreas?
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of doing my observing hours. I'm actually getting towards the end of it, and I'm at Fairhaven Union. And what I've been noticing, along with everything that's been going on with the pandemic, is just a general exhaustion. You know, there's just not a lot of energy to it, and it seems like everybody's kind of slow to coming back. And I notice it too with even here at college sometimes. And you know, I worry about it, and I worry that this is what, you know, what the future of our education system is going to look like. So.
I agree with what you're saying. I'm not sure I have an answer to that. One thing, when you talk about energy, I think about game-based learning, and you know, we're doing a lot with games and gaming, and kind of again, that's a way of bringing some joy into the classroom, just some plain old fun. Joe talked about having a kid laugh so hard their mask comes off, and we've started playing kickball a little bit. And we had an incident today where the teacher may or may not have made a big error in the field, and it got one kid laugh. This is a kid who doesn't laugh in class, and this kid was laughing so hard, she tears were streaming down her face, and that's like a win, you know. And again, I think what Joe is right. If we can have kids just laughing like that, I think, Andreas, that brings some of that energy back. But I too am feeling that as well. Anybody else have questions or observations? Amanda?
Hi. I know that, like, same thing with Andreas. Like, I've noticed in like my school, like where I'm observing, like sometimes like the teacher really just has to encourage the students to, like, you know, just push through the last, you know, like half hour or whatever, because they're just like getting tired, and like you can just see it like on their faces, and just like the lack of energy sometimes. So sometimes she'll do, like, you know, mental breaks too, and like just play a game with them for like 5 or 10 minutes to kind of just pick them up and help them get through it.
Thank you. Meg, Joe, Maura, do you have any, you know, if you feel low energy in your classroom, how are you addressing that?
Don, I feel like our schedule is so like fast that I feel like sometimes I don't have that I don't have time, like we don't have time to like get tired. But so I guess I would just say I try to get them, you know, an outside brain spark is, you know, moving our bodies. Sometimes I'll do yoga with them, and I'll just try to get them to like move to get that energy going back again. I totally feel the fatigue. I think something that helps center me, and I think I mentioned this last week, but it's just that networking, like trying to keep my door open sometimes, and just like reaching out, like, you know, just trying to get the network of supportive of the adults that are in that are with me so that sometimes we can find a good chuckle out of something that helps us just laugh at ourselves, laugh at the mistakes that we make, you know, if we step in it a little bit. And if we're laughing, sometimes that just shows the kids that we're, you know, we're here, we're having a good time, we're trying to do the best that we can. Yeah, I don't have a good.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great observation. Andreas, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut anybody off, but there's now Monica and some of my classmates are well familiar with this scenario, but I'm from Sparta, New Jersey, and I went to Sparta High. And what happened back home was that there was a new class that was implemented. It was a gender studies class, and it was headed by a teacher who was very renowned, very well loved in the school. And the board specifically instructed her not to implement certain types of materials, certain books. And she didn't feel that that was particularly right. And she implemented the books anyway. And she had actually gotten put on probation for this. And I want to know if, like, what would be like a general response to if you're instructed by the board about something that you feel in your heart is right?
Maura?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. And I think we're seeing different things happening at board levels right now, and in communities sort of everywhere. And there's a lot of like misinformation if we think about like, you know, people feeling like critical race theory shouldn't be taught in schools, for example, when we know critical race theory is a legal framework that's used and applied in education to think about equitable systems, and is not curriculum, for example. And so I think one of the things, like, there's a real power in teachers coming together, but then also thinking about at the board level, like, what are the policies that are in place? And as teachers, you know, getting to know some of those policies, which is not something that sort of teachers always have a role in. And I think unions are also really helpful there too, in helping to navigate. And so thinking about like, who are your supporters, and working closely with your superintendent. But I think boards right now are really grappling with that. In Vermont, if you haven't looked it up, the Vermont School Boards Association, Superintendents Association, VPA, and VCSEA put out a joint statement really defining equity at the policy level, because what you're sort of defining is more of like it is directly connected to policy, because boards deal with policy. And so if you haven't looked at that definition yet, and looked at some model policies, that would be a really great exercise for your class to sort of go through and think about, like, if it was in Vermont, sort of what would be the next step. But it's a really great question, and it is a complexity to something that you know, we're working sort of up against, and it's a challenge right now.
Thank you.
Jamie?
Yeah, I have a question similar to Andreas. I was just wondering, like, regarding the incorporation of the social justice piece, how are families and parents reacting to this? Like, I was just wondering if they're, for the most part, supportive. I'm from a pretty small Vermont town, and for Black Lives Matter specifically, I know some parents are very strongly opinionated on that such perspectives and stories like that shouldn't be incorporated in schools. So I was just wondering what to do if parents are against stuff like that.
Well, so last year, I can just kind of talk a little bit about the strategies as a teacher that I used. Last year, we had some social justice reading groups, and I took all the books home and I read them, and they were riddled with the N word. And I was like, holy smokes, I can't, first of all, I think I had given the parents sort of a letter saying, this is what we're doing, and this is the expectation, and this is why we're doing it. And then I sent that out to the parents. And then when I saw the language that was being used, I actually got in touch with some community members who helped me design some dialogues about not only about race and racism, but also there was a column in the New York Times last year, and it was called "Why the N Word Is Unsayable," and we made that our the title of a kind of a seminar discussion that we had. And so we, my strategy is always to make sure the parents are aware of what's happening, give them the opportunity to opt out if they want. I mean, obviously I think that all kids should be hearing this, but a lot of this also stemmed from the fact that when I asked kids if they had heard the N word at school, every single one of them raised their hand, every single one of them. And I continued to ask that question. And it's not just in middle school. This is like elementary school. They're being exposed to this kind of language. And, and then I asked an expert to come in and help me structure the lecture, because, that's when you start thinking, I am a white male, pretty much privileged white male, the archetype. And so what do I know about that? What do I carry? What mistakes am I going to make if I'm the only one who's designing this lesson? So you bring in a lot of different folks. And I also had kids of color in those classes. So I reached out to those parents personally, and I talked to them about that just to make sure that you're not doing harm. And I think there's a lot of preparation that needs to go into them. But the other piece to it too is if you read the headlines on the front pages, right? Again, if we're not talking about these things, then kids are looking at you and saying, you're acting as if it doesn't matter, or if it's not the real world. And that, I think, divorces kids from the purpose of an education just as much as any of the systems that Joe was mentioning, the schedules, or the disparate expectations that we have for them. Other folks want to contribute to that one?
I was just going to say, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've having some struggles at the district. I'm not sure if you follow in the news, but we do have a dedicated group of parents and teachers that meet once a month to talk about these things. And I think that that's been really helpful to just, parents are hearing what teachers are struggling with, and teachers are hearing what parents want and need. Obviously, we're all the folks that are dedicated to that work are more in alignment philosophically around it, but it helps as teachers to just reassure that there are folks in our community that back up this work, and our principals on board, and our district has a policy, so that all of that helps to just help us to continue to do the work, and as Don said, communicate. And the kids are really good communicators around that. Just even, I feel like sometimes the students just sharing with their folks, here's my identity poster on gender identity, or here's my identity poster on racism, that has helped to, or racial identity, sorry, is just pulls them into the loop without, necessarily having all the information, but we're not hiding it, right? Like it's right out there. And I think transparency as best as we can helps diffuse some of the tension.
Thank you very much. I do want to be mindful of our time. I know it's the Thursday before the Friday before the Thanksgiving break. And I think that I know that everybody I've talked to is very, very happy about the coming vacation. So what I'd like to ask people to do, just as a way of closing our meeting today, is in the chat, if you can just write something you're grateful for or you're looking forward to. I do also want to thank Monica for bringing your students. I really appreciate it. And also for your questions and contributions. That's awesome. And just also a reminder that the middle grades conference is happening on January 29th from 9 to 1. It's online, and Alex Vanette is going to be the key speaker addressing trauma-informed instruction and social emotional teaching. So that'll be worth your while. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving with loved ones, that you get to take some time off to do what you love to do. And if you can just put in the chat one thing that you're grateful for or you're looking forward to, we'll close it out. Thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. and you're the best. This is one of my support groups, and I deeply appreciate all your work. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.